What's happening, guys? My name is Darius, and I'm back with something a bit different from my regular playthrough videos. In this video, I'm going to go through pretty much the one thing that every single player that's been playing Warframe ever since this Warframe came out just been asking for: a complete rework of its abilities. And the rework that we're talking about is, you guessed it, Hydroid. Because Hydroid's been out in the game for a long time, I mean since the early days, people just been clamoring for a rework. They've been asking DE constantly, time and again, when is Hydro going to get reworked? His kit doesn't really feel all that special. His kit isn't really powerful. His kit doesn't really, I'd say, outside of his ultimate ability and his farming capabilities, his kit wasn't really, well, I'd say his kit was underwhelming. And because of that, a lot of stuff that went on with Hydroid needed to be updated, so to speak. And because of that, we're going to be getting a complete Hydroid rework. Everything from how his abilities operate to a whole new passive. Because of that, when Abyss of Dagath comes out on October the 18th, that's when his rework is going to go into play. So what this does is that it changes all of Hydroid's status effects to corrosive damage and status, and not impact damage no more. Which is really good because it makes him more offensive. It makes his abilities more useful outside of just knocking enemies down. He can actually stagger enemies now, and you can deal follow-up damage to him. And not just that, two of his abilities, Tempest Barrage and Tidal Surge, both of them, both that deal impact damage, is dealing corrosive damage overall. Also, his charged abilities, again, Tempest Barrage and what was it? Not Undertow. Tentacle Swarm. I apologize. Tentacle Swarm and Tempest Barrage are both no longer chargeable abilities, meaning you don't have to wait in order to use each abilities. Each ability is going to have its baseline, meaning it's going to have its maximum AoE effect. Because of this, you don't have to sit and be vulnerable to any damage that enemy deals with you. It'll just affect where you point the ability at, and it'll just activate. And not just that, his passive ability changed as well. And right now, I'm just reading directly from the forum. So if you guys ever do want to read the forum, this is what it says. Passive changes. Hydroid's existing passive have a chance to spawn a tentacle when performing a melee slam attack. They are removing the existing passive entirely to be replaced by an entirely new effect. The nature of Hydroid's existing passive pushed players to a very specific playstyle, basically regular usage of the melee slam attack. Basically, the melee slam attack has a chance to spawn a tentacle, similar to Tentacle Swarm, but on a minor scale. So they're basically doing out with that in its entirety. Okay, back to the changes. Hydroid's new passive will affect an enemy once Hydroid damages them, lasting until their death. It makes the first instance of corrosive status on an enemy remove 50% of their armor rather than 26%. Not only will this make the first corrosive status stronger, it also means corrosion status can reach 100% armor reduction with full stacks. So that basically means that when you reach full stacks with corrosion, especially on his passive, you actually strip enemies of all their armor, which is extremely good, especially if you're playing by yourself, or especially if you're doing Steel Path, which will make it a way easier way to deal with enemies. Now to continue on, to clarify, this means Hydroid does not need to apply all or if or any of the corrosive status effects on an enemy. As long as Hydroid has damaged the enemy, the corrosive status effects can be applied from any source and will receive the benefit. So basically, you can apply the status effect, and it doesn't need to be full status effects for enemies to get affected by the armor reduction, which is actually extremely good, especially if you have specific builds with melee or certain other primary or secondary weapons, you can pretty much kill enemies instantly. Now, now the next one was removing charge mechanics. I already went through that already, where charge mechanics won't apply no more. It'll apply to baseline changes. So basically, this makes Hydroid's play more fluid with more time spent attacking rather than charging abilities for their maximum effect. Basically, increasing their radius or AoE abilities. Now, we're going to get into the actual meat of the whole thing, and that's his actual ability changes. Now, before, his abilities usually would deal impact damage or it would knock enemies down. Now, each effect can deal corrosive damage, meaning Hydroid is a corrosive Warframe capable of damaging enemies in their entirety. So basically, his playstyle is going to change completely, meaning you won't have to worry about him being just a farming frame. Now, for the ability changes, first up is Tempest Barrage. Damage dealt will cause enemies to stagger rather than ragdoll. As you know, when enemies get hit with Tempest Barrage, well, the regular Tempest Barrage, the enemies will ragdoll or get knocked to the ground or flop everywhere. This will cause enemies to stagger instead, meaning they'll stay on their feet, so you can still deal decent damage to them or not have your shots whiff right past them. Now below that is this should make enemies easier to kill as they will stay in the range of Hydroid's other abilities and be more open to headshots. Of course, like I said before. Next to that, the Corroding Barrage Augment mod, that's the augment for Tempest Barrage, has been renamed Viral Tempest and will have a chance to apply a viral status effect rather than corrosive. So basically, Corroding Barrage is completely gone and is being replaced by Viral Barrage because again, all of Hydro's abilities are going to deal corrosive damage. So any augment mods that deal corrosive damage is being switched out and being reworked to deal another type of damage. Now, next to that is changing the impact damage of Tempest Barrage to corrosive damage meant that corrosive status effects from the augment was already included. They changed this to viral to maintain the relevance with the other changes. So basically, when you use corrosive barrage, it's going to be called viral barrage, but the status effect is just going to be switched to viral and not corrosive. So it'll pretty much free up your builds, or if you want to try something completely different, and you can use this on different types of grenadier enemies or other types of enemies like the Corpus. And again, Tempest Barrage will stagger enemies instead of ragdoll, making them easier to target. Next up is Tidal Surge. Now, Tidal Surge will allow some steering of the wave for more control over where Hydroid and his enemies end up when the ability is finished. Basically, this meant that when you use Tidal Surge you couldn't control Tidal Surge at all, and you dash ahead with Tidal Surge and knock enemies down. And when you reach the end, it knocks enemies past the point of where you brought them to. But they completely changed this now because you can now have some symbionts of control over Tidal Wave instead of getting locked, instead of dashing straight someplace and not being able to turn, like hit a wall, and the ability is pretty much just useless. So basically, you can turn the ability slightly and still continue straight forward, so you won't get geometry snagged on anything. And the next bullet point after that says Tidal Surge no longer violently flings carried enemies at the end of the surge and will instead deposit them where the surge ends. So this means that enemies will stop where you stop and not go flung past where you are, which means this will follow up with more damage, or you can finish them off with, ground finishers. Tidal Surge will apply corrosive status effects to enemies based on how long they are carried by its waves. So, the longer the wave is, or the further you take the enemies, the more stacks of corrosive you deal, which is great for priming them for follow-up attacks. Tidal Surge will cleanse all of Hydroid's negative status effects. This brings one of the benefits from the Tidal impunity, well, impunity, I apologize, impunity augment mod into the ability directly to keep some survivability in Hydroid's abilities with Undertow's removal. So basically, Hydroid still benefits from his Tidal impunity augment mod. Well, actually, no. It will cleanse him up. It will cleanse Hydroid of the status effects. So that means you won't need the Tidal impunity augment mod anymore, if they may change it to something else. So now this will, well, this is applied directly into Tidal Surge. So basically, it's a two-in-one deal. You'll apply corrosive status effects to enemies the further they go, and you'll cleanse any status effects on you, which is actually really good because you don't have to worry about being dealt heat damage and then have to suffer through the heat damage and have it completely just kill you outright. You can just cast Tidal Surge and it will cleanse it immediately. Now, next up is Undertow. Now, this thing is that the ability is being removed completely and is being replaced with Plunder. Basically, Undertow was the ability that made players, less likely to play him because the ability wasn't really all that great, and it didn't really feel like you was contributing. But a lot of players saying that wasn't really fun, and it basically means that when you go underwater with Undertow, you were extremely slow, and it made you just absolutely horrible with dealing damage to enemies. And basically, it absorbs enemies, but it didn't really kill them. It didn't really kill them instantly. It was like a slow burn. Basically, players just don't like the ability at all. It was basically useless. And I'll be honest, I thought it was a bit useless too, because I didn't like how the ability operated. Plus, it killed all of your speed, and you had to stay stationary underground. It could only move at certain points. I mean, it did have its uses, but personally, I didn't really use it as much because it kind of killed my speed going around the map, killing other enemies. Now, because of that, it's being replaced by a brand new ability called Plunder. Now, here's how Plunder works. A new ability added to Hydroid's third ability slot. Basically, it's similar to how when Excalibur had Radial Javelin replaced with Jump Pad, basically. So anyway, Plunder is Hydroid's new third ability. His three, basically. Now, Plunder reads, all enemies in range will have corrosive status effects remove their armor permanently, increases Hydroid's armor, and granting boosted corrosive damage to weapons. So this is actually really good because if you already have weapons that already have corrosive damage on there, this will boost corrosive damage. Plus, it will permanently take down armor of enemies that is in range or around. So this is actually good because it strips them permanently and it doesn't affect them for a certain period of time. It just does it permanently and you won't have to worry about reapplying it at all. So the point under that is that the ability is stronger based on the number of corrosive status effects applied to enemies affected by Plunder. This means with full stack of corrosive status, their armor will be removed permanently. So this is great because this is a combo ability. And I do believe this will make it much easier to strip enemy armor, and you can use other abilities to stack it. And you can apply Plunder and makes the stacks permanent on enemies, and they can't remove it at all. So this will make fighting against, Kuva Liches or Sisters way easier. Now, under that, the curative Undertow augment mod is being renamed Rousing Plunder, and will cause Plunder to heal Hydroid and his allies within affinity range. Again, this is extremely good because it's similar to Undertow, but this will heal Hydroid and his allies when they're in range of it. So basically under that it says Plunder removes armor based on corrosive status effects on an enemy. It also provides an armor and damage buff tracked in the lower right corner of your HUD. So basically you'll see how much healing and how much you'll see how much armor and how much of a damage buff you'll get when dealing with enemies. Now, Tentacle Swarm haven't really changed much, but it makes it a lot easier to deal with enemies instead of having enemies, flop all over the place. Now with Tentacle Swarm, it says it will now hold enemies in a steadier position, making it easier to eliminate enemies locked down by tentacles. So this basically means that Tentacle Swarm will be a lot more steadier and it will be a lot more reliable instead of just having enemies flop all over the place and not really know whether or not enemies are. Well, it make lining up your shots way easier, which is extremely good. And overall, I just gotta say that I really do like his ability kit now that he's a corrosive warframe because outside of Saryn's abilities, Hydroid will be a more reliable corrosive type warframe because he uses his abilities of the water to chip at and deal damage directly to enemies. But overall, I would say that his kit is still more geared towards beginning players as he's beginner friendly. But at the same time, it also feels more like players can use him in an advanced way. So right now, if you haven't got Hydroid, the best time to get him is right now. And to get him, you go to Earth and you can farm his parts by defeating the boss of that planet. But don't forget to buy his blueprint directly from the marketplace so you can build him and get a head start on his abilities. Well, on top of his kit. But I have to say, Hydroid has been overdue for this rework for years, and players just been telling DE when we're going to get a rework. You guys should rework his kit and stuff. His abilities just isn't fun no more. His abilities feel underwhelming. Enemies just fly everywhere. You really can't keep a steady aim on enemies. I'm just happy DE is actually doing everybody else a favor and really putting work in to make him Hydroid way more viable and way easier to work with. And I'll be honest, his undertow ability, I'm glad they're removing it because, and I'll admit, it really isn't fun at all. And it's mostly because you can't really do anything, and enemies that drown is alright, and it does kind of take enemies off the field, but it kind of feels like you're not really contributing anything to it. And I just gotta say that I'm glad Plunder is actually there because it actually gives you a sort of combo feel to it. Like you can apply, you can apply either Tempest Barrage or Tidal Surge, and then follow it up with Plunder to permanently, strip them of their armor. But overall, I would say that Hydroid definitely is going to be not is going to be beginner friendly, and he'll work great against grenadier enemies, and be one of the premier warframes to deal with Kuvaliches or sisters if they have a weakness to corrosive damage. So other than that, I do like his kit, and I like how they changing it up, especially considering that Hydroid needed it for the longest time, and they're reworking a lot of stuff that's going on. Plus, I can't wait for Dagath to come out as well on the 19th because I believe they're the 54th Warframe, and DE just been on fire lately, and I'm happy they're taking a look at what Hydroid should do and what he can do. So yeah. Anyway, that's it for me for now. Happy you guys could stop by, check out the brand new reworks for Hydroid, and it makes me look forward to what DE has in store, especially for the whole thing that they got that's in store for us later on this year, this month, and especially the brand new update that we're going to get next year, Warframe 1999. So with all that said, I'll catch you guys later.